1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and welcome to the Vininspo podcast with me, Ed Merrison. This is where wine is a travel experience. Join us as we pick up bits and pieces, make new friends, and create memories that make our future interactions with wine, people, and places all the more meaningful and fun. My guest on this week's podcast is Reg Egan. Maryann is the second-generation vineyard at Wantirna Estate. Founded in 1963 by her parents, Reg and Bettina Egan, Wantirna Estate is the vineyard that sparked the resurgence of the Yarra Valley in Victoria, Australia. We talked about living it up with lavish hospitality and fancy French places, lipstick, short hair and showbiz on the Wine Lover's Guide to Australia, whether the glossy veneer we paint over wine obscures its fundamental truth and beauty, pointless inorganic chemistry and those molecules with balls coming off, crying in the corner with nothing but 2 barrels of everything and a puddle of Petit Verdot, wine and dine marathons with the Middleton, Marks and McMahon families, the mailing list loving on the annual open days, being taken for the PR chick or the girlfriend when rocking up to a wine event, the fateful coin toss that decided the future of another Yarra icon, the la-di-da hoo-ha when champagne came to the valley, the fugitive soul of a passionate wine and the wisdom of Reg, and how you get what you get and you don't get upset with a true single-site project. I started by asking Maryann about the little girl who grew up on a vineyard.
I think I talked a lot. I was always getting in trouble for that at school. Sport was the reason I went to school. I did well enough at school because if you like sport, you're sort of competitive. So, you want to do well at school as well. I was probably a pain sometimes. But yeah, I was just a normal girl that didn't quite know what was going on in the world most of the time and sometimes didn't get jokes, but certainly didn't tell anyone I didn't get what was being talked about, but
you laughed anyway.
Laughed anyway. Oh God, yeah, because if you had an older sister and she was laughing, she may not have known either, but I certainly wasn't going to let on that I didn't get the joke.
And you and your sister were close growing up?
Yeah, we were. I mean, I think we probably fought just like most siblings do, but it was only 13 months difference between the two of us. So I was the annoying little sister. She had to fight all the battles to, can I do this, can I do that? And she'd fight, and she was very good at debating and answering when Dad said no, give me a reason. She'd always think of a good reason, and she'd fight the battles, and then the following year I'd come along and go, can I? And it'd just be, oh yeah, okay. And then I think usually, Elizabeth, if you're going, need to look after your little sister. Mind you, I was always taller than her. Yeah, I think I was probably irritating from that point of view, that I was always sort of hanging around thinking whatever she's doing, I might do that too.
Was Liz sporty? Did she have similar interests?
No. No. So no, she, what was Liz? I think Liz was interested in talking on the telephone to her boyfriend and certainly never studying, well, not studying that much, but, flying through school. We lived at the vineyard, and whilst the vineyard is these days part of the suburbs just came to us, but there's no public transport that went to us. So we did rely a lot on getting a lift somewhere, at least to a train station. But obviously you wouldn't catch a train at night as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, whatever we were. We were sort of not the weird family, but it was quite unusual because we went to school in Melbourne, Armidale. So it was, it was a bit of a hike to get to school, a train and a tram. And of course that was endlessly social. I think Liz liked that part about school. But yeah, so we lived out there, and it was obviously very different when you go to an all-girls, one of those schools, and you are this family that live on a vineyard rather than living in a house in Armidale doing all those sorts of things. So it always seemed that everyone else was doing these incredible things on the weekends, catching up with others to go to the cafe and, I don't know, meeting boys in the park, and we were kind of stuck out on the vineyard. So it must have been annoying for our parents to have to drive us everywhere, but hey, they chose to live on a vineyard, so that was their problem.
They did indeed. And they didn't just drive you everywhere. I gather travel was always a big part of growing up for you guys. So what do you remember from the early days of travelling with your parents?
Well, I remember the first trip we did was in 1972. So I was 8. It was a big trip in those days. I think you went Melbourne, probably Sydney, then you stopped somewhere, Singapore or Jakarta, and then you'd stop somewhere in India, and then you'd stop somewhere where you weren't allowed off the plane. Then you'd finally arrive in Europe, and it seems such a long way. I mean, it is a long way, I suppose, but it just seems such a long way. And then we'd go on these sort of 7-week trips. I mean, I don't know how my parents managed to put up with us for 7 weeks. A lot of it was wine focused. So, sometimes we'd land in Germany. Mostly we were in France, and Dad would have written to these various wine people and said, look, can I come and visit? And he probably wrote in English. His French is not what you'd call excellent. And these wonderful people would say, yes, please come and visit us. And we'd go in there and there'd be bad French and bad English going around. And, quite often they'd invite us, the whole family, to have lunch with them and have a look at all the wines. And I also think that was pretty incredible. I'm sure I was bored at times, and certainly we were dragged into a lot of cold underground cellars, which smelt like musty, mouldy things as, wine was tasted and so on. But, you don't have huge memories when you're 8. I certainly remembered more as I got older from the various trips, because these trips would be every second year. We did 4 of these trips, and then I think after that our parents left us with a nanny or something. It probably became way too painful. But yeah, they were very much wine focused, food focused. Mum was all over amazing hotels and amazing restaurants we used to go to. And I remember one night Dad said, I think just 2 courses tonight, girls, because we'd sit up there and we'd have, entree, and then we'd have maybe langoustine or, something fabulous. And then Liz would always have the cheese trolley and I'd have the dessert. And, God knows how much it cost. But we'd have these fabulous dinners, and then they'd be drinking away and we'd pop off to bed. So they were pretty amazing times. And we were so lucky to go to so many beautiful vineyards. I mean, I remember very, very well going to Laurent Perrier, and the invitation had come through Doug Crittenden, who was with the Crittenden wine stores, which, were famous in Melbourne. And the owner, so he was a Bernard de Nonancourt, who had an amazing history himself, fighting off Hitler and going into Eagle's Nest and all sorts of amazing stories. And his marketing man was also a Bernard de la Giraudière. And they just invited us for lunch. We went to their home. We went to the owner's home and we sat up at their table and had this incredible lunch with these beautiful people who, had no reason to be fabulous to us. And, every time we visited Champagne, the door would be flung open and they'd treat us like we were so special. Some really beautiful friendships my parents had, and I've been lucky enough to have, through being invited into these people's houses and wineries, and just incredible generosity. Really incredible.
I'm sure that hospitality made an enormous impact on you, and also presumably the conversation. I mean, I'm sure we're pretty bored, pretty cold down in the cellars, but around tables, around the adults, being allowed to be present there, but also listening to that flow of conversation and how those two worlds came together, as you say, with people who your father didn't exactly really know beforehand, but those friendships kindled over a table.
Yeah, just really generous, and we always try to open our place to people. I mean, particularly French, because we feel like they've been so generous to us over the years. It's nice to, be able to give back some of that. I mean, we obviously don't have the historic chateaus to be entertaining people in, but a great part of the whole wine journey, I think, has been the people.
Yeah, and did that food preparation, feeding people, bite your sister early on from those trips?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was more Mum's dinner parties. She used to have these pretty epic dinner parties, or they used to host them, with the food and wine people of Melbourne. They became they were their closest friends, and even, and become then wine dinners and things. And it'd be the sort of, back in the 70s, it was like the 4, 5, 6 course sort of 3-day preparation thing. And I think Liz used to love going in and serving and helping out, plating up the food. Oh God, that's that word, plating up. It wasn't called that then. Helping putting food on plates. She helped put the food on the plates. So I think she was more interested in food than I was. I used to just like eating it. And she used to hang around doing that a lot more than me. And I think, like so many people, Liz didn't have a clue what she wanted to do when she left school, and she did a bit of this and she did a bit of that, and then, sort of fell into cooking here and there, and then became her career.
And presumably the two of you had to tinker around a little bit at harvest and other times of the year. Did you do much in the vineyard? Did you like being in the vineyard when you were asked to do jobs?
No, I hated it. So we were made to. Dad had this scheme where every second Saturday, we took it in turns. So every second Saturday, one of us would work, because apparently if we both worked together, we fought. And I can understand that. If somebody's doing one thing, you get bored with what you're doing and you want to do what they're doing, and we would have been painful. No, hated it. And we seemed to be missing out on it, going back to the, living out there, at harvest time. Oh, God, picking the grapes, and it was a nightmare. Liz drove a tractor up a tree. I drove one into a ditch. I mean, it's extraordinary that we didn't kill ourselves. And it's extraordinary that, I give so many instructions when my kids, when they were little and they get on any equipment, I kind of give a million instructions. I don't touch that, and not that the tractors are particularly tricky, but I think Dad just was fairly casual about it. Or I don't know how we nearly killed ourselves twice. But he wasn't a reckless father. Maybe we were just twitty. The first question always was, "Have you hurt yourself?" When we went to him and said, "Oh, the tractor's in a ditch."
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so that was good. But no, did not want to have anything to do with it. I turned 18 and I moved to North Melbourne, and as far as I was concerned, that I was having nothing to do with the vineyard.
So sport was still very important to you. What kind of sports were you playing, and what level?
Well, not particularly good level, but it was that usual thing where we went and saw our fairly hopeless careers advisor. And I remember sort of saying, oh, look, maybe I could go and do this winemaking course in Adelaide. And this careers advisor said, oh, no, that's a job that boys do, and it's no, and you haven't got chemistry anyway, so no, you can't do that. And I thought, oh, okay. And not that I actually wanted to. It just was, what am I going to do? And so then I went back to the form room, and somebody said, oh, I think I'm going to do this. I went, oh, it's okay. I like playing. Well, maybe I'll do that too. In those days, you didn't pay for your education. So it was like, oh, I'll do that. So look, I played tennis quite a lot. That was probably my strongest sport. I played hockey, but I wasn't anything fabulous at it. But it seemed like fun. It was fun. It was a really fun few years, yeah.
First course was physical education.
Yeah, yep.
And what followed that?
Well, then I chucked a backpack on my back, like so many of us did and still do, which is great, and went travelling and had no particular plans. I thought I'd catch up. I always often wonder how I thought I'd catch up with friends, because it was obviously way before the old little computer we have in our hands these days. I suppose you used to arrange to meet your friend at a particular time at Garda Est or something, and you just rocked up. I met up with some of my friends, and then I thought, it was nearly vintage time. So I thought, I was running out of money. And I thought, I better go and see if any of those people who I used to get dragged around to see have any vintage jobs to pick grapes, So that happened. Dad came over. I think I must have rung him, obviously reverse charges because I had no money, probably in the middle of the night, to say, look, you got any wine friends that you think might give me a grape picking job? And look, I think for whatever reason, he decided to come over and introduce me to a few people and, got a job. In fact, the first place I was at, I was with Jean-Jacques Conferon. So he had just died. So Sophie had just taken over. And that was pretty kind of unusual in those days for a youngish female to take over a pretty good domain. So I was put in touch with her. And so I ended up spending harvest with her, which was a bit of fun. And I was, amazed at some of the winemaking. Because whilst I'd been dragged around vineyards, I'd never really taken much attention. So it was a bit of an eye-opener as to how the actual bits and pieces got made. I remember having an afternoon off one day, and I'm not saying that they did this at the conference, but sitting down by the little river nearby the winery, and this vineyard guy just rocks up and he's got all the picking bins and he just was washing them in the river. I remember thinking, oh, you'd want the river to be clean because, even though I hadn't done a whole lot of study, I kind of knew that probably wasn't the way you keep your bins clear of, any sticky muck that may be turning into anything that could be growing and multiplying. But anyway, that was a bit of an eye-opener. Much of it was because no one used cooling. They just opened the doors at night so that if the ferments got up in the high 30s, well, that was what the ferments did. And with a shrug of the shoulder, that's how we've always done it. I mean, they don't do it like that now, of course. But yes, that's how my grandfather did it. And look, some of that has good reason. Some of it has improved, because that's not always the best way to look after your ferment. But it was a fun time. Great lunches and dinners being put on by the vintage pickers. Unfortunately, it's hard to do that these days.
Yes. At that stage, are you just passing time in France, or are you starting to think about maybe this is something you could do?
I think by then I decided it was something I was going to do. And I knew that the phys ed degree I had was not enough to actually do that much. I knew I was going to have to come back and do physio or something like that, because I'd done a bit of work with rehab while I was finishing up my phys ed degree. The phys ed degree I had was one of those early sports science degrees, so it wasn't a teaching one. It was what now would be called sports science. And so I knew, well, if I come back, it's probably physio. I suppose at that point I thought, well, actually, I don't think I really want to do that. I'll do wine science. And so at that time, I applied to go to Wagga in Charles Sturt. And, that would have been September, October. I was in France, and then I came back and started the wine science.
So how long was that course?
Well, it was part-time. And because I was, so mature at 22, I didn't want to go to Roseworthy and end up with a whole lot of 18-year-olds. Not that I was very mature, but, that seemed a bit hard. And being poor again. So I did Charles Sturt by correspondence, which is, I think, largely how it's still done today. And it's 6 years. And lots of driving up the highway to Wagga Wagga.
Did you enjoy the study?
Yeah, look, I didn't mind it. I mean, I was really bad at some of the science subjects. And, so many of these degrees, they're just full of subjects you really don't need to do for the end thing. I mean, inorganic chemistry, and basically you're just learning that an alcohol plus an ester equals or something. I mean, I can't remember any of it because I just crammed it all in. And, all those molecules, those balls with molecules off and everything, not much point in my life. And it was just hideous, but you had to do it. And you had to do uni physics so that you could then go and do winery engineering or something. Well, I get that, excepting that the physics we did was, if a skier goes down a mountain at a certain speed and goes off a jump that's this high and he's doing this, at what speed will he land? And it's like, well, how is that relevant to anything? It was just stupid. And there was a lot of that. And I hope that universities have stopped that nonsense, because, even if I had, got a high distinction for winery engineering, most of the time, if something breaks in my press, I'll have a bit of a go, but then I'm going to call the man or the lady. Sometimes I think it's a bit ridiculous. It's interesting to know how refrigeration works, and I found that interesting. But if my refrigeration breaks down, I'm calling the refrigeration bloke, aren't I? I'm not going to try and fix it myself. Well, I'm not. Maybe some people are, but I'm not.
I don't know. But certainly now that you're paying through the nose for your education, you don't want to be doing anything that doesn't count.
Exactly. I think the first maybe 2 years was free, maybe, and then the rest I had to pay for. So, yeah, it's annoying. And it's also a really good reason not to fail a subject, which I never did, because, when you fail a subject, that's expensive.
Yeah, and so where were you working through this time?
I think about the first year I was at Wantirna, and then I did a very brief stint in retail just to see what it was like. It wasn't for me. And so then I'd done a harvest up at Tyrrell's and met a whole lot of, winemaker types. And one of them was Wayne Donaldson, and he was the first winemaker at Domaine Chandon. And so I rang Wayne one day and said, hey, I've had this little time in retail and it's not for me. Do you need any help, or do you know anyone in the valley that needs any help? And he said, oh my God, I do. Come tomorrow. And I stayed for 6 years. And so during that time, I finished my degree. And Chandon thankfully sponsored me, so I didn't have a hex.
What was the profile of Chandon at that stage? I mean, obviously there would have been excitement about its arrival there, and I guess the lift that gave to the valley having champagne land on your doorstep. But was it already going great guns or still in the building phase?
I was still in the building phase. So when I arrived, for those who've been to Chandon, the Greenpoint room, which is a visitor centre, that was all open air. So it was very much in the building stage. I think we had 8 tanks, and now it's quite the tank farm if you go around the back. It grew really quickly during that time. It was crazy time, very hard work, but nonetheless a lot of fun. It really made a difference to the Yarra Valley. The Yarra Valley was just starting to become a bit less the mums and dads, the Wantirnas, the Yeringbergs, the Mount Marys. De Bortley had arrived, and they'd arrived with a restaurant, and so that was something. I remember initially people thinking, oh my God, this big winery coming in and they're going to hoggle the limelight and it's going to be all about Domaine Chandon, and it never was. Tony Jordan, who was the managing director, or chief, whatever. He was always really keen to make it about the Yarra Valley and not make it about Domaine Chandon. And also, I know the Champenois will drink champagne through the whole meal, but if we were entertaining, if there were some journos or if there were people from France or people from wherever, we'd obviously start with the Domaine Chandon products, but we then would go on to Yarra Valley products. So we would then go on and drink all the local wines. So it was very much a lifting everybody up sort of attitude, which was great because the Yarra was then changing really quite quickly, because with the advent of Domaine Chandon coming, it really sort of did put the Yarra Valley more on the international stage, and then you got more players and players who were becoming more well known. It very much was an exciting time to be in the Yarra Valley. Just a lot more hospitality started, so a few more restaurants, and yeah, it was a time of a lot of expansion. I remember we had this big, it was maybe one of Moat's big events, or maybe the 10-year, I can't remember what the celebration was, but the whole of that beautiful Riddling Hall was taken out with tables and these, just these fabulous evenings that they occasionally had, and really bringing something special to the Yarra Valley, which the French do really well. And obviously Chandon wasn't French per se, but there was that idea that if you're going to do something, you're going to do it like really well and with a lot of pizzazz, and not just sort of, we'll have a barbecue dinner or something.
And did you enjoy making sparkling wine?
I did. I don't know if my teeth did. God, we used to do the blending at the end of harvest. And by the time I left, we were blending about 100 different batches of wines. I can't imagine how many it is now. And those base wines are 11.5% alcohol. The acidity, I actually can't remember, but the acidity would have been 6 or 7 grams per litre. And, you'd be tasting all day. Oh, my God, your teeth would be very sore at the end of the day. It was great because it was such a different thing. I hadn't done anything like that. It certainly gave you an understanding of the difference 5% can make to a wine. Because sometimes you just change the blend by, 5-6%, and you'd really have quite a different wine. I did really enjoy it, but I left when I had our first daughter, and I could have gone back. But I think I was kind of done from the point of view that we just got bigger and bigger, and you just become, you sit behind a computer and you manage staff and you manage your bottling line. I mean, and it's a lot with sparkling because you've got make the first wine and, make that properly, and then after you've blended, you go straight into the tirage, which is when you get the wine ready for the second fermentation. You grow up all the yeasts and then bottle the wine. And then, 18 months, 2 years later, you then take that wine out. You then get that wine again and you get rid of the yeast and you put the sugar syrup in and you finish the wine. So it's a lot of processes. So you're always managing a lot of bottling line staff because that's going the whole time. And then you've got the winery staff. And in the end, you sort of become a manager. And not that you want to be dragging around heavy hoses for the rest of your life either, because that's not, it's not that interesting. But I think the more and more senior you become as a winemaker, the more and more you get on planes to go and talk about the wine, ordering bottles and labels and all that sort of nonsense, and manage staff and promoting. So I think I'd had enough of all that.
So roughly what year did you end up there?
That was 96 I finished. Yeah, our daughter was born beginning of 96.
So fame came a-calling not very long after that.
Excuse me, I'm just having a glass of wine.
With the Wine Lover's Guide to Australia. How did that opportunity open up for you?
Oh, I got a phone call from this lady called Margaret one day, and I'd just taken our eldest daughter swimming, and she said, she explained who she was and would I meet, and she was from SBS, and I'm not actually sure Peter Forrestal, the wine writer, the WA wine writer, I think he recommended me because I needed a female, obviously, because you've got to have a male and a female. To make sure we have those females hanging around. Anyway, and so I met Margaret and we got on really well, and she said, would you like to come and do this? And I said, oh, sure. I've got no idea how I organise our children, because I actually had 2 children by then. I've got no idea how, because Hannah was only 1.5. I just would leave for 6 days at a time, and somehow everybody else dealt with the girls. I mean, Justin was working, in an office. In those days, you had to go to work. You couldn't work from home. Got no idea how it all worked out. But anyway, I would just flit off to places and just babble about wine.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. I look back at it. I thought, oh, God, if you ask me anything about that, I better have a quick look. My children are horrified at my short hair and my lipstick. Mind you, I've got to agree, the lipstick was just another thing. I've never worn lipstick. I don't know why. They must have told me to wear it. I remember having to have makeup lessons because, it's not part of my thing. That was fun. It was fun. The people I worked with were great. Really, really fun people. I mean, it was unfortunately sometimes the usual thing. If people hadn't listened when they were rung up by the producers to who was coming to interview, obviously I'm not the world's most famous winemaker, but they obviously hadn't listened to that. So generally, and I've had this a lot, I get it less, but when a female rocks up to talk about wine, people immediately expect that you're the marketing person or the PR person. And when I rocked up to a couple of places to talk about wine, they'd think, oh, well, she's the female, just host, and would think, would talk to me like I didn't have a brain about wine. And then, I'd say to them, oh, actually, I'm a winemaker. And then they go, oh, and then start talking to me totally differently, which I've had my whole career.
Yeah, right. Does that still happen?
Oh, it still happens. Nowadays it happens mostly at wine dinners when the room's full of men and they assume I've come along as the wife. There's always somebody who wants to tell you exactly what's in their cellar, and I don't know, I should be impressed what's in their cellar. I don't really care what's in your cellar. I'm not drinking it. So there is that. I still get it.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? As you know, I was watching back through quite a few bits of episodes, at least, of Wine Lover's Guide to Australia. And one thing that struck me was the simplicity, in a good way, of how the subject's tackled. Just a really natural way. It feels, like even though you know what you're talking about when you're asking questions, the simplicity of letting someone talk about what they do and why it's interesting to them and what they're trying to achieve and what they've learnt to date and what comes next for them. It's funny to see so many years later that topic has become a lot less inviting and interesting, I think, in many ways.
I absolutely agree. I think that the wine industry often needs to get out of its own way. There's way too much kind of nonsense talked about wine. Don't get me wrong. I love talking about wine with wine people who are interested in wine or who are other winemakers or whatever. But I think that we often make wine far too complicated to not necessarily younger people. That's being sort of rude to say younger people. But, people who haven't had a background in wine and, grown up with it. I mean, I don't think anything of it because obviously I've grown up with it. But I just don't think we need to make it something that's this sort of crusty old thing that only old people, boomers, they're the only ones who have wine, or if you don't collect wine, then you don't understand wine. If you just go and buy a bottle of wine that you like and you drink it, well, that's good. I mean, that's fine. That's what you want to do. You don't need to have a 17,000 bottle cellar if you do, that's fine too. But it doesn't need to be turned into something that's unattainable to a lot of people, not from a monetary point of view, but from a point of view of people are scared to ask a question. And there's no dumb questions. I always say to people, there's no dumb questions. It's a drink in the end, and it's a really lovely drink. And there's the glass of wine that you have that day of the week. There's the glass of wine you have the other day of the week. There's the glass of wine you have with your friends that appreciate wine. And then there's a glass of wine that you have that friends who are just sort of drinking wine. I mean, it's all the different things, but it doesn't have to be turned into something that's this, ridiculously complicated thing. I mean, one of the great things to do is to go and visit a winery. And these days, in Australia, so many of the kids go and visit wineries as their weekend get together with their friends. They'll get a bus and they'll do it. And, back in the day, I'm sure half of them would drink too much. But these days they're interested because they're interested in just the beauty of a vineyard and being with their friends and having a drink. They're not sitting there endlessly dissecting the wine. And if they want to do that, there's opportunities to do that. But it's good to see wine becoming accessible in that point of view. And I think sometimes we try to overcomplicate that it's a drink that can be enjoyed in so many different ways.
Yeah. The other thing that struck me is a lot of people think that wine doesn't make great television. I mean, the big problem with wine really is that when you're talking about something that tastes of something and you're not tasting it, there's always that. But I've always thought, coming from a background a bit like you, I suppose, where I travelled a lot and fell in love with places and hospitality and the cultures that you'd come across and the way that you were treated by other people and the way they invited you into their life, that the pictures are great. Like, it makes for a wonderful visual medium. And the thing is that nowadays, in most media, it's a very glossy, glamorized, shiny, picture. Whereas actually seeing the pictures of the Hunter Valley with sort of slightly dark skies and muddy, grim Gippsland and Lewin Estate over in Margaret River on a not particularly perfect day, it really did hit home how lovely these parts of Australia are, just in themselves. A lot of the gloss that we try and put over the wine story sometimes sort of gets in the way of how real it is. And that builds another barrier, I think, sometimes too.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the wine industry now is wine tourism, and a lot of wineries now are wedding venues, and that's become a beautiful place to get married, and I understand all that because wineries are beautiful. But yes, if you look back at some of the old photos, they're just vineyards. I mean, it's farming, and you've planted the vines, and there hasn't been all the other fluff that goes with it, because there are a lot of people spent incredible amounts of money on these cellar doors and the whole wine tourism thing. There's a mixture, isn't there? There's a mixture of the small places that are still, hoeing out the weeds, as I was doing today. I mean, there's that cliche too of people go, you know what, I love drinking wine, so I think I'm going to have a vineyard. I'm going to go and plant a vineyard. And of course, they work out that it's quite a lot of work, or it's very expensive to pay people to make all the work.
I think it was probably the fact of how we often put a filter literally over the pictures that we're looking at, but also sometimes over the subject. Whereas without that filter, it becomes a lot more normal and easy to understand and easy to be part of. One of those really nice bits actually in the program, I watched your interview with Dr. John Middleton, who I never met, but it was quite touching because he was at home playing the piano. There was a little bit of clear local knowledge coming from you about the personality that you were talking to, but also a lot of affection that came across. And it reminded me, again, I've mentioned this before, of talking to Andrew Marks and the way he remembered your family and the Middletons and the Marks and the McMahons, Yarra Valley legends, really, it's fair to say. But do you remember as well, going back to that idea of the hospitality, the conversations, and the dinner parties as well, the way that those families got together and just the sheer fun that they had around wine?
They really did have a lot of fun around wine, and there was a lot of discussion about wine. Yeah, I remember Pete McMahon. I adored Pete McMahon from Seville Estate. I had to have someone supervising me doing my exams from Wagga. I could have gone to a university somewhere where I had to have an invigilator. So, I think they had to be, a lawyer or a doctor or something. So I rang Pete. So he said, yeah, you come. You can come up here. And so he put me in this room at the beautiful Seville Estate with a gorgeous, gorgeous view. And he said, what subject is it? And I said, I think it was chemistry or something. And he said, okay. And he came back and he said, listen, if you need any chemistry books, they're just behind you. So you just help yourself. I'm thinking, well, he was a great, great man. I adored him. And John and Marley, of course, my parents had a lot of great times with them. Liz and I would go there and we'd sit in it. They've got such a beautiful house. There was a little nook where there was a fire and we'd sit in there. But yeah, they were incredible times. They used to drink incredible wines. A lot of their wines they bought from Christie's in London. They'd buy at auction wines. I mean, even when I was young, I knew that they were, famous wineries. Yeah, I imagine they would have discussed wine stuff. I probably wasn't listening or wasn't interested. But yeah, they were all great friends.
Yeah, well, for all the socialising that they seem to have gone up to, I mean, it's quite incredible, really, the achievement of Wantirna Estate, Seville Estate, Mount Mary, Gembrook Hill in wine quality. I mean, what incredible wines those four have ended up producing, and how much they say about Australia, great Australian wine. It's quite remarkable, I think. Which probably brings us to Wantirna Estate, the vineyard.
Yes.
Tell us about the site that you work.
Well, I think it's about 18 kilometres from the centre of Melbourne. It's 12 acres. Our father planted it in 63, started planting it in 63, and then planted it over the next few years. In those days, it was about, I'm going to say, 4 kilometres from the closest suburbs, and our father always thought it was going to be overrun by housing estates. He was a lawyer in Mount Waverley, which was the furthest out suburb, and he was just interested. He'd not drunk wine ever until he was about 25, but he became fascinated with wine. And so he wanted to plant a vineyard, and he didn't know what to plant because in those days, the only grapes being grown in Victoria were up on the Riverland, so hot climate, or in Ararat and Great Western, which was sort of hot days, cold nights. So there's no one really doing anything in what was considered sort of the cool climate like Bordeaux and Burgundy, and that was where Dad had his beginning to understand wine. So he planted all sorts of things. He planted what we have now, which is Cabernet and Merlot and Pinot. Pinot probably didn't come until the 70s, but Chardonnay, Grenache, Shiraz, Pedro Jimenez. I mean, it's this whole fruit salad of wines to see what would do well. And in the same time, he also, in that sort of wine circle, had met Dr. Bailey Carrodus, and they decided to plant a vineyard together up in the Yarra Valley because Dad thought that he would probably be selling Wantirna at some point because of the housing. Famously, Dad realised that this partnership wasn't going to work in 1969. They were planting vines together, and it became clear that Bailey, in his mind, was going to spend time in Richmond in a winery that he was going to sort of put in there. He had a beautiful bluestone building, and I don't know whether it was a bakery or
a malt house, I think.
Malt house, yeah. I just remember going there, quite young, obviously, and I remember it being a beautiful building. So anyway, it wasn't going to be. They tossed a coin. Whoever won the coin toss to decide whether they wanted to be bought out or buy the other one out. Bailey won the coin toss, and he said, well, I'll buy you out, Reg. So Dad stuck with Wantirna and Bailey kept Yarra Yering. And of course, that didn't solve the problem with the suburbs, excepting in 1972, the then Premier of Victoria instigated across Melbourne quite a lot of green wedges. So areas that were not going to be made into suburbs, and the vineyard happened to be in amongst that green belt. The suburbs have grown up all around us, as you know, and they're continuing to grow around us, but we're still in this sort of protected, it's about 17,000 hectare area that goes right from Listerfield right through to Baroni or wherever it finishes. So that was just kind of by chance that happened, because obviously the suburbs would have just kept coming because we are right in the middle of suburbia. Around us, for those to paint a picture, we have what were orchards, and now most of those orchards are gone, but they're now just horse adjustments, so they're open space. And yeah, so it's very unusual. I have people say to me, oh, there's no way there's a vineyard there. And I go, well, there is. And they go, well, no, there's not. I go, well, yes, there is, because I grew up there and I work there. It's still a dirt road, which is becoming more and more troublesome because trucks get bigger and bigger. Every time you look at a truck, it gets bigger, and it's getting harder and harder to get trucks into our place. But anyway, we still manage. And everything's there. So the house is there. The winery is on site. We have extended the winery because it was a nightmare of a winery to work, because it was built in the 70s. And to be fair, in those days, everyone was talking about using gravity as your only form of moving wine around. And so we had our fermenters upstairs. Oh, it was just a nightmare. And one day I just said, look, you know what, I can't stand this anymore. If I'm going to keep making wine here, I think that was in 2018 when we had quite a large harvest, I can't be going up and down these narrow stairs, dragging these big bloody hoses up and down. I need to be able to set this winery up so that I can pretty well do everything myself, because Dad was getting on. I was doing most of it anyway. And so we put on a small annex, which is made, concrete, walls and a roof. That's all you need for a winery. A bit of space in between. And I obviously get help during the year, but it's made it pretty easy that I can, if I have to do a whole lot of stuff by myself, I can manage it.
So just 4 wines produced, now named after
wines.
All of Reg's granddaughters.
Special granddaughters, not named after the daughters, just the special granddaughters.
It's good that you put over that.
I'd feel a bit weird if I was talking about a Maryann wine anyway, so I'm quite happy with that.
Maybe that could be your icon wine later on.
What, when I'm dead?
So Chardonnay, Cabernet Merlot, we've got Pinot Noir, we've got Cabernet Franc Merlot. Now, one thing I did notice on the Wine Lovers Guide to Australia was you plonked down by a very golden, gloopy looking glass of Chardonnay back in 1999. ABC, anything but Chardonnay, was mentioned in the program back then. And there was clear malaise about the way that was going at the time. But tell me a little bit about your ideal Chardonnay. I mean, you love it. What's the Wantirna style?
Well, the Wantirna style is somewhat traditional, I suppose. Now, there was a time that somewhat orange or yellow, whatever Chardonnay you were talking about, Chardonnays which were only 1 year old, and they were that colour. And they were these dreadful, big, over-oaked, super alcoholic, thick, lacking in acid wines, and they were undrinkable. I mean, and so that did start that sort of anything but Chardonnay sort of idea. Our wine obviously never been like that because that's not very nice to drink. So our wine has always been a wine that's, yes, there's plenty of fruit, there's plenty of weight and body, but never big and heavy, and always great acidity. We don't use a whole lot of oak. And the whole thing is making a balanced wine that's, the fruit's there, the flavours are there, but it's in control. It's not this big flowery wine. There was a time probably about 8-10 years ago that some people decided that they loved drinking older Chablis that had had a few years of age, and so therefore they then were making these Chardonnays, which were so far the other end of the scale, which were being picked probably 10 days, 2 weeks earlier than I would pick, and we're making them from really just the driving acidity, and they'd gone way too far the other way in my view. We just kept in our lane. We didn't try and make that. They were really popular. I think a lot of the reason why they were popular is they were doing well in the shows. Probably the people who were making them were the people judging the shows. And it was all a bit too far. And the thing is, a lot of Australian wine drinkers aren't aging their Chardonnays for 6 years to be that beautiful aged Chablis style. The majority of people are buying their wine and drinking it. I mean, I think sometimes winemakers think too much about how long you might sell us something, and the wine needs to be approachable. Young obviously has to age, and our wines age beautifully. But I think that the pendulum's swung too far one way. And so I think that there's now something in between. And I think we've always made that in between sort of style wine that's got plenty of flavour but has got great acidity, bit of oak. And we don't overdo anything. We keep it pretty simple. Yeah.
So that's Isabella. Lily is the Pinot. Pinot tends to torment most people who make it among the range that they produce. Is that the same for you?
Well, I think Pinot is the one that you've got to get everything right in the vineyard. I'll probably contradict myself when I talk about the Cabernet in a minute, but Pinot you really must pick when it's ripe. Chardonnay doesn't care terribly much. I mean, you pick it here or there. It's calm. Pinot, you got to get it ripe. You don't want to make a Pinot that's not ripe. The Pinot does torment you the most because it's harder grape to sample in the vineyard. The bunches are very tight. You know, you go around and you pick a berry here and you taste it, you go, oh, okay, that's getting ripe. I always do bunch samples because you need to really squeeze the whole bunch to see what the sugar ripeness is. But the sugar ripeness isn't the whole story. It's got to be about the flavour. It's got to be about flavour with Pinot. And you need to taste it and do those bunch samples, not to get a figure that says it's ripe, not to get you 13 BOMO or whatever. That's part of it. But it's always got to be about the flavour. Sampling from both sides of the vine. And then for me, it gets down to things like deciding to pick, because often we're picking Pinot when it's still quite warm, so what temperature I can get the Pinot into the winery. If the day that I'm picking, if I can get the pickers in early, if it's been a cold night overnight, I might let it sit on skins for a few days. But if it comes in and it's already a bit warm, I'm not going to do that. So I might change the way I make that wine in various ways. I might give it a bit of time on skins after ferment. It's very much a tasting and a gut feeling of what the vintage is. I don't think I've made the Pinot the same way in the last 3 years, just because of the way it's come in or the weather or the way the ferments have run, just changing it up a bit to react to what you've been given in a year. I mean, we always get great fruit, and that's not me pumping up my own tyres. It's just that you don't get bad years in the Yarra Valley anymore, you know. It doesn't rain that much. It certainly doesn't rain much during the ripening. It's not like when I was a kid and we'd be picking grapes into May. You're done and dusted when it's still really great weather. So you get different years in terms of the season. It's a matter of adjusting yourself. And there's nothing I can explain. I think that just comes from having grey hairs and being old, that you can't understand your fruit and you adjust.
And then onto the wine. I reckon if you fed all the things that I'm into some kind of machine and it had to spit out my favourite wine in Australia, I think it probably would be on that algorithm, Amelia.
Yeah, well, see, Cabernet, well, it's Cabernet, there's Merlot, there's Franc, and there's a bit of Petit Verdot. And it's just, the Yarra just does it so well. They're not big wines. They're wonderfully approachable young, but they age really well too. And they're just, the thing about getting fruit ripe in the vineyard with Pinot, it's the same but slightly different with Cabernet. Cabernet bunches are really long and spread out. The bunches they're not tight clusters. And so with Cabernet, I think the really important thing to make good Cabernet is to walk through your vineyard and to taste lots of berries. And when you're past getting more than the occasional herbaceous capsicum-y Cabernet flavour, I think you're good to go because you still capture Cabernet. If you go too far, you're just making red wine, nice red wine, but it's not Cabernet because Cabernet can get, ripe and it loses its Cabernetness. And I love the tension of the Cabernet, the elegance of Cabernet wines, the interest that there is in the glass and how it changes. And it's just so great with food. It's a great food wine. It doesn't get enough love, Cabernet, in Australia. It goes through phases. I think it's on the slight up phase at the moment. It's the wine that our private customers buy the most often because I think people love to age it. But yeah, it's lovely wine, Cabernet.
Yeah. And Hannah, the last one, just not to leave her out, it's quite an unusual addition in a way to have as in some ways, pinnacle, the rarest beast in the collection, but a little bit of a special place in Reg's heart, I feel.
Yes. Yeah. So there were 3 granddaughters and there were 3 wines. And that's all we made at Wantirna. Then there was another granddaughter, my second daughter, and we initially made a sparkling base because of my years at Chandon, and then it's just ridiculous. I mean, we made 1 drum of sparkling base, and honestly, there's no way I was going to ring up Chandon and say, hey, can you, go through the whole sparkling wine process with 200 litres. I mean, it's as much work to do 200 litres as 200,000 litres, and so I thought this is ridiculous. So Dad always had an absolute love of the wines of Saint-Emilion, specifically Cheval Blanc, which wasn't always the price it is now. And it's a Cabernet Franc Merlot blend. So we decided to make just 1 barrel of this Franc Merlot blend. We've never made more than 1 barrel a year because we very much want the Franc and Merlot for the Amelia blend. So we got the 1 barrel. It doesn't take away too much from the Amelia. And the story behind the Merlot in our vineyard is that in the 60s, Dad ordered Merlot rootlings from the nurseries, and they're very similar in an ampelographically. That's quite a hard word to distinguish between the 2 varieties. And so when Dad planted the Merlot, he also was planting Cabernet Franc. And so our Franc Merlot on our vineyard is a field blend. The original block is a field blend of Franc and Merlot, and it's probably 65% Franc. So it kind of made sense. We make 1 barrel. When you make 1 barrel, it's 282 bottles or something. It became extra special. And of course, she's my daughter, my second daughter. She's a baby.
How big is the vineyard?
The vineyard's 10 acres under vine.
I know there's no such thing as normal, but if you were to have an idea of a normal year, how much wine might you produce?
Oh, you know what? I counted the other day, but I can't remember. I think what we're releasing this year, which is 24 Chardonnay and 23 Reds, something like 600 dozen? No, that seems too much for us these days. It's not very much. I'm really bad at stuff like that. I can tell you that, this year we've made 3.5 barrels of Chardonnay. Oof.
A bumper.
I know, a bumper. The vines are so old, the Chardonnay's so old that it just doesn't produce huge amounts. And we have done some regenerating of the Chardonnay, but even with the regenerated, they're just beautiful bunches, but they're not huge producers. But you know what? I'd rather make it a beautiful wine and not have as much. Pinot this year we made 8 barrels, so that's a lot for us. And Cabernet this year was a bit pathetic because the berries were just tiny weeny. A beautiful wine, but I think there's only 6 or 7 barrels of that. So we bottled a bit more than that this year. But yeah, it's 25 dozen a barrel. So I don't know, whatever. That many.
So being that size and having just the 1 vineyard to play with, it's a story that's really quite easy to encapsulate, I suppose, in some ways. But does that leave you sort of feeling that you are, when we talk about the wine industry, do you sort of feel that you are sort of part of it, sort of not part of it, doesn't really matter?
Yeah. I remember in 2020, which was a dreadful year for everything. Shocking year. Lovely wines, but we made 2 barrels of Chardonnay, 2 of Pinot, 2 Cabernet, 2 Merlot, and a puddle. We had to cut the lid off a barrel to ferment the Petit Verdot. That's how many grapes we had. We took the top of it because we had like 9 bins from 5 rows. It was just, and I remember sitting in a corner and just crying because I thought, this is pathetic. Backyard Italian people in Bulleen are making more wine than I am from the fruit that they buy at the Dandenong market. And here I am, I'm supposed to be a winemaker, I'm supposed to have a wine business. And this is ridiculous. This is utterly ridiculous. I'm sick of this. I'm done. Anyway, I've tried to have a little bit of a moment. I thought, well, whatever. It is what it is. But I did feel a bit stupid to myself. I mean, whatever. Yeah. But I do remember Tony Jordan, who was the head of Chandon. I said to him one day after I'd left Chandon, and he was wanting me to come and do something for, I can't remember what it was. I said to Tony, I have to wait till after vintage. And he said, oh, for goodness sake, Maryann, you're making 20 tonne of fruit. How hard is it? You used to, look after whatever it was. Can't even remember what it was. It was a lot. And I said, yeah, but Tony, these days, if I bugger up the tiniest thing, I'm done. Whereas, in Chandon days, if we buggered up something, you could just blend it off into another tank. So, you certainly put a lot of pressure on yourself to make sure you don't stuff anything up, because that's a lot. But you do sometimes feel a bit ridiculous because you've got this sort of tiny vineyard and everything. But at the same time, we're very much, I think, an important part of the history of the Australian wine story. Yeah, we're not the biggest. Obviously, we're not the biggest. But Dad is very much an important story to the Yarra Valley and the resurgence. Those who were the beginnings of the Yarra Valley, the Yeringbergs and Mount Mary, the Wantirna, Seville. I mean, even Seville until recently, when the wines were made by Pete's grandson. It's such an important part of Victorian, if not the Australian wine scene, and are all still being looked after by people silly enough to continue on doing the winemaking. And we're all very close. I'm very close to both Sam and Sandra in that they're, my 2 closest winemaking friends, just by probably chance rather than the history. And because we always get lumped together, we'll put those 3 together because they're the 3 old people from the Yarra Valley. So we've spent a lot of time together at wine things. But yeah, I mean, it is ridiculous in the sense of the bigger places.
Well, I'm not sure I'd call it ridiculous.
Well, I mean, in terms of, the size and the amount of work you do to produce the wines. In some ways, it's actually a really good size to be because I can kind of do most of it myself. I've got a great bloke that works with me, but, it works.
Yeah, and I think it was about just over 10 years ago, maybe, you said to me when I was up there that you seem to be becoming cool again. Not because you changed in anything, but because everyone else had started doing things that you had no choice but to do as a small grower. And it's really true. Like in the last 10 years, how much has it become the thing? Even if people are bigger than you, they're basically saying that they do what you do as the ideal side of winemaking, just the old-fashioned stuff, making do with what you've got, not doing anything fancy, not tricking anything up, just literally working with what you have, putting it out. Nice, simple set of wines that are what they should be from a special place.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I often laugh because there's all these, fads and things in the fermenting in concrete. Well, we've been doing that for forever. The field blend, well, we have that with the, I just giggle. Single vineyard. I mean, I think single vineyard is one of the most important parts of our story, or any of these small places' stories, is that you get what you get and you don't get upset. I mean, in terms of this is what you get from this vineyard in this year, in this season. Yes, you then put your little stamp on it, but with it, the old cliche, the wine's made in the vineyard. I mean, it very much is. If you grow good fruit, you really just are putting of course you're putting your stamp on it in a way, but you are starting with this fruit that you've grown yourself, that you've looked after, that you've, sometimes looked at and gone, what are you doing? Are you growing this year? Is it going to be cold weather? We endlessly go on about what the weather's going to be like. We're coming up to flowering soon. What's that going to be like? But, all that vineyard stuff. But I think with people going back to let's not be these big commercial things, being small and doing it all yourself and not bringing things in from everywhere, I think with the crazy world that we live in, people are looking often more and more for a really good glass of wine that they resonate with for more than just how the wine tastes. I mean, I like most winemakers, but I tend to buy my wine based on whether the winemaker's a friend or I like them, or I like their philosophy, because there's so much good wine out there. And I think that, a lot of people come to us because they have been for a long time, or because they like what we do, or they like that we are small, or, while the world gets crazier and crazier, it's nice to have these things that are still being done carefully and not by huge automated thises and that's.
Yeah, and also not an airbrushed story as well. Pull the curtain back and what's actually happening. I mean, it really is as simple as that. And I guess that's really the definition of this authenticity that people seem to be chasing all the time. There is no filter. There's no veil to try and pretty it up and make it look like a glossier, better place or story. It is what it is, and that's why probably it has resonated so much. You've got your open days coming up, most important time of the year. And again, there aren't too many that can profess to have the kind of relationship that you have with customers. It's probably a fair bit of preparation, so thanks for coming on the podcast while you're doing it. But how does it feel for you, welcoming back these people and knowing that you've been an important part and continue to be an important part of their life, not just with visits to you, but probably with taking their wines home and putting them in the cellar and giving them to people that they love and opening them on special occasions? That must be pretty cool.
Yeah, I really love that. I mean, there's people who have been buying wine since I was little, and they've all come, and they've, various times our children have been out there and they've watched our kids grow up, and, oh, you're the Hannah, are you? Oh, and you're the Amelia. Oh, lovely to meet you. And, my daughters are 30 and 28, so it's been a long time. But we have such lovely customers, and it's so lovely to see them all. Some obviously they could get their wine sent to them, but we have a lot that come out, and those have been coming for years. And it is nice because we've got a few customers who come and they go, now the tradition is the day before we come pick up from you, we pull out a bottle of your wine, and sometimes, they're just starting the Cabernet that's 10, 12 years old. So we had a bottle last night and I was drinking beautifully, and it's always our tradition. We always have a bottle of your wine before we come out. And, we have the odd person that's come to us because they've named their daughter Isabella, and they're still buying the Isabella. She's 32 or something, all these years later. And of course are now, came to us because of that and are buying wines. But we have really lovely customers, and it is really probably quite unusual because, these days wine is, often just bought online and this and that. But as I was saying before, I love to drink wine that's made by my friends or, people who I admire. And I hope that's, we have a similar sort of relationship with a lot of our customers, and it's nice. It's going to be a nice day on Saturday because last year we had pouring rain on both the days. So better get Reg on the ride-on mower tomorrow to finish off zhuzhing up the place, get him onto the 94-year-old Reg onto the mower to finish the mowing. He's ready to do that. So, yeah, it's good. It's really nice. It's a nice relationship. It's more than just wine, it's friendships.
And speaking of drinking wines by people you like, I remember a few years ago when we all got together, you seemed to hit it off pretty well and then go and visit a couple of people. Claudia Cigliuti from Barbaresco, Elsa Matreau from Burgundy, I think Virginie Taupenot as well from Burgundy. Pretty cool women, obviously, like yourself. Do you still love, just like when you were, or like your father, I guess, and your mother when you were younger, travelling to Europe, how is it for you now going back and seeing people and still going to vineyards and catching up?
I absolutely love it. It's such a great way to form a holiday around. It's a lovely thing to have, to go and visit some wineries. And look, I've become great friends with those girls, initially just from an introduction through Cellar Hand. But they're great girls. I mean, Virginie came down and we had a hilarious night in Chamonix together when I was over there. I mean, a quick ski before vintage. And she, I think, does a bit of skiing, but she does quite a lot of wine bar drinking. She's well known in the town of Chamonix. And we just had just a great time.
Selling wine, obviously.
I'm sure she's selling the whole time, of course. Yes. But no, she's, they're awesome women in Italy too. And again, just through introductions from you guys or from the boys at the Prince, made some awesome friends. And it makes for a really lovely, punctuates your holidays so well too. So you think, right, so we're going to go and visit this person. And, all of a sudden you just hit it off because people are lovely. People in the wine usually are lovely. And make some really great friends from hanging around each other. It's been great. They always find it so hard to come to Australia. Oh, but Australia's so far. I can't come. I go, well, how do you think I got here? I got on a plane for 24 hours and I came here. So just download a Netflix series, get on a plane and come out and I can show you some hospitality in Australia. But they're all a bit hopeless at that.
I guess we'll give almost the last word to Reg. It seems only fair. This is from Reg Egan's book, Of Rivers, Baguettes and Billabongs, and I quote, "Art is the understanding of beauty through the senses, through all the senses, and in order to properly understand the dream of a Da Vinci or the inner life of a Bach, one must be capable of adoring the scented and fugitive soul of a passionate wine." What do you reckon?
Classic Dad.
Has wine helped you appreciate life and expanded your imagination?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. I mean, just as we were saying before, it's just a really interesting thing. It's made in so many places. I really want to go to Georgia and see where wine actually started. Yeah, it does. It introduces you to so many people and to so many places where vines are. I suppose Europe's my main sort of focus. Although I've just been in Chile and that was interesting, and I'd like to sort of see more about the wines in that part of the world. But it does. It opens up so many doors. It opens up your interest to go to so many different places. And the people, the friendships. I mean, it's more than just a drink. Yeah, there's so much history with wine too, which is so interesting. It's a bit of fun, really, the whole thing. Bit of nonsense, but a bit of fun.
That's it for this week's podcast. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please like and subscribe and share with everyone. I mean it, your support means the world. You can also subscribe to my Substack, that's edmerison.substack.com. Feel free to leave a comment too, I'd love to know what you'd like to hear more of. But for now, I'd like to say thank you to Lucas James for the music, Neil Williams for the artwork, and to my guest, Maryann Egan of Wantirna Estate. Till next time, live wine to the fullest. Cheers!